Hi, and welcome to another episode of Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannan. So, what's the deal with the God of the Gaps? The God of the Gaps is an argument that atheists often make, and they claim that the existence of God is often relegated to um, gaps in scientific knowledge, meaning theists will claim that something which is currently inexplicable in terms of science must be caused by God, and therefore God must exist to explain this uh, inexplicable natural phenomena. So, basically, this is the God of the gaps. There is a gap in understanding of some aspect of the natural world. Therefore, the cause must be supernatural. Now, this isn't true, not at all. But you may hear atheists try to pigeonhole all theists as believers in the God of the gaps theory, and thereby they try to denigrate all theists and their beliefs, claiming basically that they all believe this. Well, that's not true at all. Um, so some theists definitely use gaps in scientific understanding for certain phenomena as evidence of proof of God's existence. That that may or may not be the case. It may be the case that there is simply a gap in scientific knowledge, and further scientific inquiry and study will eventually resolve the mystery and explain it in scientific terms. It's also possible that it is in fact evidence of God, and it can't be explained in scientific terms. But that's one of those questions: who really knows whether the gap is evidence of God or not? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But this sort of argument isn't necessary to prove God's existence. So this is a very minor sort of argument, and don't get confused and think that this is the end all on God's existence. It's not. It's a very minor argument. It only applies to limited sorts of proofs, and it doesn't apply to the central proof for God's existence. God, as I've explained in many videos that I've posted with Casual Learning, is a metaphysical solution to a physical problem. And that physical problem is something with the mind has to decide what becomes real and what does not become real out of the infinite logical possibilities for material reality. That's a metaphysical proof. It's a metaphysical argument, meaning metaphysical meaning outside the physical. It means it's outside science. Metaphysical arguments are outside of science. Science is limited. Now, science studies the here and now. It studies material creation. It can only study that which is within the universe and is made of matter or energy. Now, that's not everything there is, because there's also God. But God is metaphysical. God is the best proofs for the existence of God are metaphysical arguments. Unless you're lucky enough to see a miracle to prove God's existence, the best arguments are metaphysical arguments. They're not within the realm of science. Science has nothing to say about things that are beyond the universe. Science can't study anything beyond the universe. A scientist is a human being who is made of matter. Matter is a form of energy. Scientific instruments are also made of matter. That's also a form of energy. And there is a physics law called the law of conservation of energy, which means the universe can't lose energy. So if a scientist or a scientific instrument were to leave the universe, they would pop out of existence and go to this other universe, let's say. But because they popped out of existence in this universe, their energy contained in their bodies and their mass would disappear from this universe. But that would be a violation of the law of conservation of energy. So that can't happen. It's impossible. It violates a major law of physics. So scientists and their scientific instruments will never be able to leave the universe in order to tell us what's beyond the universe. Can't be done. It's a physical impossibility. So that's a limit to science. Science can't tell us anything about what lies beyond the universe, including uncaused beings like God, metaphysical beings that we know by necessity must be real. But they're not within the realm of science, so science can't experiment on God, can't prove or disprove God's there. It's a limit to science. It doesn't mean God isn't there. It means science is limited in its ability to prove certain things, such as the metaphysical or those things outside the universe. It's a limit of science. A lot of these atheists make this underlying false assumption that science is not limited, that it is capable of answering any question there is. And that's not true. It's not true. Science is limited. It cannot tell us about anything outside the universe, or can't tell us it can't prove anything about metaphysical beings or anything beyond the universe. It can't. And if any scientist or physicist tells you that it can, they're lying to you. It can't. Scientists and physicists often come up with these theories, about metaphysical things, like, the multiverse. But that's science fiction. That's never going to be you're never going to be able to prove that in a scientific sense, because science is limited. So just because a physicist or a scientist tells you something, that doesn't mean it's true. Some of them have agendas to push, and they're not telling you the full story. And the truth is, science has limits. So, just because science can't prove God exists or doesn't exist doesn't mean God doesn't exist. It means there's a limit on science. And there is a limit on science. Science can't prove why science itself exists. Can't. Mathematics can't prove why mathematics exists. Can't. You need a God, ultimately. And that's good reason to believe in God. So, God of the gaps, there's really this underlying false assumption that science can answer every question that you could possibly pose. That's false. It's not true at all. There's limits to science. And therefore, this God of the gaps argument is a minor argument at best. It's not even metaphysical. It doesn't even touch upon the metaphysical. It's really about just scientific proof, really. And the metaphysical arguments for the existence of God, I set forth a lot of them on the videos, and they're not within the realm of science. Science has nothing to say about them. They are logically true, and you can prove the existence of God through metaphysical philosophical deduction and sound reasoning, and you have to do that if you're talking about metaphysical things, because science can't tell you anything about those things, but those things are real nonetheless. So you have to use logic and reasoning and deduction and philosophy in order to address those questions. So this really just has to do with science. It's not addressed. This is not an objection to the main proofs for the existence of God, which are metaphysical, such as, you've got first cause argument, prime mover argument, the beginningless time paradox, got the first order argument. That is, you need a God in order to create the initial order for all material creation to base its existence on as the universe evolves and expands. And that's what the Big Bang was. It was a first order. But you need a God to tell the universe what that initial order is. So these are just some of the metaphysical arguments for the existence of God. Look at my videos. I go through some of these. And these are solid arguments. They're winners. But they're not within their own... science is limited, and it can't prove or disprove these things. And the God of the gaps argument doesn't even apply to these metaphysical proofs. So don't get confused by the God of the gaps. It's a very minor sort of objection. And ultimately, if there's a gap in scientific knowledge, nobody knows whether this is because God is doing it or whether there's just some science that hasn't been discovered yet. Who knows? It could be either one, but it wouldn't surprise me if it wasn't God, but it was just some scientific knowledge that still needed to be gained. But this is a very minor sort of issue. When it comes to God and the proof of God, the metaphysical arguments are what matter. This is where the proof lies. Unless, of course, you see a miracle, for instance. Then you don't need this. A major mistake that underlies a great deal of atheist arguments is that the atheists misunderstand the nature of God. They don't even understand who God is. God is not a material being. God is not created of mass and energy. God does not exist in the universe as a physical being. That's why God is invisible and immaterial. God is an uncaused being. God is understandable in a metaphysical sense. The necessity of that being is understood in a metaphysical sense. But God is not a material being. God the Father, I'm not talking about Jesus, is a metaphysical being. So the atheists confuse a lot of people because a lot of their arguments presume that God is a material being. But that's not true. God is not a material being. He's a metaphysical being. God is not made of matter or energy. God does not exist in the universe. And you have to have that proper understanding of who God is. God is the creator of material reality, but not subject to material reality. God is not subject to time. or mass or energy, because God creates those things. God cannot be subject to that which he creates. Otherwise, he wouldn't be the creator of those things, and you wouldn't be talking about God. So, in understanding atheistic arguments, you really need to understand that God is not a material being. And if the atheistic argument presumes God is a material being, right off the bat, that argument is false. It doesn't prove God doesn't exist. They got God wrong. I've seen this among many atheist speakers. They get the wrong understanding of God. They just don't understand who God really is. A metaphysical being, not a physical being, not a material creation. God is not subject to time, or matter or energy. God is not created. God is an uncaused metaphysical state of being. God is not created. So you really have to get an understanding of who God is right in order to understand the flaws in atheistic arguments. God creates material reality. So God created the Big Bang. God created mass and energy and space-time and gravity and all the particles of physics. And God is in charge of the laws of physics. God creates the laws of physics. God can create any laws of physics he wants. God can destroy those laws of physics. God can change those laws of physics and modify those laws of physics. God can even change the laws of physics around a particular person or around a particular place. So he's not limited in scope. God doesn't change the laws of physics in our universe. The laws of physics appear to be immutable, unchangeable. Well, why is that? Right? And the reason is because if God changed the laws of physics for the entire universe, he would destroy the universe. His creation would unravel. So God creates a very stable, seemingly immutable set of laws of physics for our particular universe. So our universe can grow and evolve and be the good that it is. God is perfectly good, and God isn't going to simply destroy the entire universe and alter the laws of physics, even though God could do that, but that wouldn't be good for any of us, including God. Why would he do that? Why would he destroy everything by altering the universal laws of physics? God can change the laws of physics around a particular person or a particular place in a limited circumstance anytime he wants. And we notice these things as miracles. That's why we call them miracles, because they shouldn't happen under our laws of physics, and yet they do. Well, the laws of physics changed, and the only one who could change the laws of physics is God. So God must have changed the laws of physics to allow this miracle to occur. But that's not changing the laws of physics in the entire universe. God can have separate laws of physics, one for the whole universe and one surrounding a particular person or place in order for a miracle to occur of a limited duration. God can do that, but God's not going to change the general laws of physics. That would destroy everything. Duh. Why would he do that? So God can create, destroy, maintain, modify
material creation at will. He has power over the laws of physics. He's omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, and he has to be those things in order to be able to control material reality. So, everything that happens in the universe is because God wills it so, because God has power over it all. He knows it all. He has power over it all. And he can change it or let it maintain its course or destroy it or create it anytime he wants. But obviously, if he changed the laws of physics, the whole universe would fall apart. The creation would no longer be what was there, and we'd all get destroyed. So he doesn't do that because he's a perfectly good God. I don't know about you, but I don't want that happening. Okay, so understand that the God of the gaps, sometimes called the God of the gaps fallacy, is a very minor, unimportant atheistic argument. The major arguments for the existence of God are metaphysical, and the God of the gaps argument doesn't even apply to metaphysical arguments. The God of the gaps argument only applies to scientific-based arguments that some sort of aspect of material creation proves God's existence. Whether that's the case or whether it isn't the case, who knows? But this God of the gaps argument is really a very minor argument, and it doesn't address the metaphysical arguments for the existence of God, which are good arguments. They're proven, and it's good enough reason to believe in God based on those arguments. I've done videos on those arguments, so you can watch them and learn from them. So don't get fooled by the God of the gaps arguments. It doesn't prove God doesn't exist, and it shows that many atheist speakers, even world-renowned speakers, have a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of God as a metaphysical being and not a material being. God is not made of parts, not made of material parts. God is a mystery, an uncaused being, not made of material parts. So when you have atheistic arguments that talk about a God that must have material parts or have a certain complexity or is somehow subject to creation, these are all false atheistic arguments because these atheists fundamentally don't understand who God is. God's metaphysical and uncaused and immaterial and not made of parts. Those arguments don't work against God. But you could get confused in listening to some of these people. So don't get confused. And if you have any more questions about this, ask them in the comments below, and maybe I'll do a future video addressing them, or maybe I'll answer in the comments below. And if you like what you hear, please press the subscribe button. There's answers to every atheistic argument out there. You just got to look for it. Or ask me. I'll give you the answer. All right. That's enough for now. Take care, guys.